You know, a lot can happen in 30 years. Not nearly as much as, say, 40 or 50 years, but still. The latter is about how long it took to nearly eradicate the gray wolf from the United States. The former time frame, the 30 years, is how long it's been since the apex predator was brought back to Idaho and to Yellowstone National Park. And they've bounced back. Once considered a decided menace and beasts of waste and desolation by President Teddy Roosevelt, the gray wolf population is estimated to hover around 500 in Yellowstone and a little more than 1,000 in Idaho. So things are going well, right? Well, that depends on who you ask. And a new podcast did a lot of that. Tried to figure out and answer the question, what's happened since wolves were reintroduced to the western United States in 1995?
Rusty Kramer is really good at catching wolves.
Heath Druzin is back in the studio.
And to be clear, wolves are really good at not getting caught.
He's recording another episode of his latest podcast.
And since wolf trapping was legalized in 2011, that's become the most prized fur in the West.
The topic,
a pristine wolf pelt, can fetch $2,000.
Is pretty clear.
He also thinks there are too many wolves in Idaho.
The title,
about a mile in,
is Howl.
I saw movement in the sagebrush ahead of me. A large black wolf trotted out into the open.
And it's a look back at 30 years of wolf reintroduction in the West.
It's a quest more than a year in the making.
Jay says the Canadian wolves brought to Idaho are different than the native Idaho wolves.
About one of the most contentious subjects in Idaho.
Scientists disagree, saying wolves are the same species on both sides of the border. And we talk to people across the spectrum on wolves, from people who love them and don't ever want to see a wolf killed no matter what, to people who would have rather seen wolf reintroduction never happen.
The podcast is put together by Heath and his colleague Clark Corbin of the Idaho Capital Sun.
We did about a 1,000-mile road trip, this loop through wolf country. So yeah, we were all over the place, from Yellowstone to the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness to the Nez Perce Reservation. But yeah, I mean, it shows you how far wolves have roamed.
The podcast covers a lot of territory too.
Wolves on private land.
When the Homestead Act of 1862 opened up land to pioneers, gray wolves dominated the western wilderness.
When settlers came west, they brought cattle, they brought sheep, right? And as you know, wolves and cattle and sheep don't always mix very well.
The wolves were a threat to survival. So during the 1870s, hunters killed an estimated 100,000 of them a year. Extermination was the goal, and by 1925, that almost happened.
Basically, we got rid of wolves in the West.
With the last wolf in Yellowstone National Park killed in 1926. For Idaho, it was a bit later.
This is a sound seldom heard in Idaho. The last known wolf pack was killed near the Middle Fork of the Salmon River sometime between 1928 and 1936.
One rarely heard a wolf in the lower 48 for decades, much less saw one. Then came the Endangered Species Act.
The act became law in 1973. Just a few days later, one of the first animals listed under it was the wolf.
It would take another 2 decades and countless public debates, but by January of 1995, 14 wolves brought in from Canada would be released in Yellowstone, and another 15 in central Idaho.
Even people who know the story will find some surprises in the podcast for sure. In Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, wolves have killed
the focus of Howl,
animals a year.
What's happened since reintroduction?
We started with 66 wolves. We've gone to maybe 3,400, even if that's not right, several thousand. It's an incredible comeback. No question they've done really well. The question is kind of, are we doing the right things moving forward right now as states like Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming have made it easier to kill wolves and made it their stated goal to lower the populations?
This is a complicated subject.
Yes, this is an extremely complicated subject, and there are not a lot of easy answers.
Are there any answers?
Yeah, I mean, there are. I'd say there are some examples of hope there. I think we can get on the same page about wolves. And one of the ranchers I talked to, who opposed reintroduction, he even said, wolves are here to stay, and so are we. And I think that's such a succinct way of putting it, because we're going to have to figure out a way to live together.
The Living Together will continue to include hunting of wolves. In 2007, the species was delisted from the Endangered Species Act in Idaho and Montana, a decision that was eventually validated by a federal court in 2011. Idaho's gray wolf management plan, for the next few years anyway, has a goal of reducing and keeping the population to around 500. The 5-part weekly podcast gets into all of that and much more, including how the reintroduction of the wolves has done wonders for the ecosystem where they live. The first episode dropped today, along with a print series version in the Idaho Capital Sun. It's part of the collaboration between the Capital Sun and Boise State Public Radio. Heath and Clark are also hosting a free panel discussion about their podcast and how they put it all together, including the people involved in bringing the wolves back. That is happening in 2 weeks. That'd be June 17th at 6 p.m. at the Boise State Student Union Building Special Event Center.